We are reduced to saying things like, make of this what you will. But today, the president said he would strongly consider testifying in the impeachment inquiry. This comes as Charlie Savage of the New York Times reports about the last time Trump submitted written answers, at least, to an investigation against him. Quote, House Democrats are exploring whether President Trump lied in his written answers to Robert Mueller's investigation, a lawyer for the House told a federal appeals court on Monday, raising the prospect of an additional basis for an article of impeachment. The acknowledgement refocused attention on a quiet debate among Democrats about whether any impeachment of Mr. Trump should go beyond the Ukraine affair and also accuse him of obstructing the Russia investigation. Back with us tonight is Chuck Rosenberg, former U.S. attorney, former senior official at the FBI, also happens to host our popular podcast called, for good reason, The Oath. All right, Chuck, what specific portion of the written testimony already submitted is raising flags now after the fact? Subset question, is this a makeable case?
Yeah, so the portion we should focus on is President Trump's denials that he knew about the connections with WikiLeaks, that he was soliciting information about it, really that he had any knowledge that WikiLeaks had played a role in, sort of exposing stolen emails to the public. And what should we, and is it a makeable case? Gosh, Brian, that's a much more difficult question. Perjury is a hard charge to bring. And normally what you need to make a successful perjury case is a rather precise question and a rather emphatic answer. And I've watched a lot of congressional hearings, but I haven't seen a lot of precise questions. And so is it makeable? Yes. Is it easy? No. And also the president couched so many of his answers in the following way. To the best of my recollection, or I don't really recall, but. And when you have those types of answers, it becomes even more difficult to make a perjury case.
Let's take the president at his word. He says he's strongly considering testifying. If he insists on written answers again, why isn't that a waste of everyone's time all over again?
It's a waste of everyone's time all over again. As a prosecutor, I never took written answers. I would never want a written answer. They are virtually useless. Sometimes you'll see this in civil litigation, but not in criminal. Now, I know an impeachment inquiry isn't quite a criminal case, but it's an analog to one. And here's the problem with it, Brian. Those questions, despite what Mr. Trump said, were not prepared by him. They were prepared by his lawyers, and carefully so. And so many of the questions were, rather precise from the Mueller team. So many of the answers were incredibly vague. If I were Adam Schiff, if I were the Democrats, I don't want that. It's a waste of my time. It doesn't get me anywhere. And it doesn't permit me as an investigator to gauge someone's tone or demeanor or to follow up with more pointed questions if I don't think they're telling me the truth. I think it's a waste of time.
Chuck, late last week, we saw a rare bit of emotion from you on the subject of our Secretary of State. I surmised on the air Friday night that it was exactly because you had taken an oath more than once to serve your country. And here's a guy, our Secretary of State, famously graduated #1 in his West Point class, 1986, and has been in his career an Army officer. Why, the question is, why hasn't he been supporting, offering air cover for his people, his employees, among them veteran Foreign Service officers? The subject came up at the State Department today. We'll show you Pompeo and talk about it on the other side.
I always defend State Department employees. It's the greatest diplomatic corps in the history of the world.
You talk about Ukraine policy, so I'm curious if you think Ambassador Taylor has been an effective envoy of that policy, and if he's going to remain in his job, or if the president has lost confidence in him.
Yeah, State Department's doing a fantastic job. I think we've delivered in a way that the Obama administration has not delivered on Ukraine.
You still have confidence in Ambassador Taylor?
Thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic day.
So, Counselor, you heard him there. He was given a direct chance to offer support, a direct chance to talk about his employees by name.
He's an accomplished man, Brian, and he's an intelligent man, but he's a coward. I said that last week, and I derived absolutely no pleasure from saying it, but I stand by it, every word that I uttered. Look, leadership means taking care of your people. And when they're being attacked by the President of the United States, that imperative does not change. He has failed his people. He has failed as a leader, and it's deeply disappointing. And so he had a chance just now, you showed it on camera, to emphatically state that he stood by Ambassador Taylor and Ambassador Yovanovitch and the men and women of the State Department. And he gave us nothing but platitudes. When asked a specific question, he walked away. There's his answer, Brian.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.